is Gapo Go for December 1st. Keep up to date with the important happenings in the Go community in just 15 minutes per week. I'm Shai Nechmad.
Good morning, Shai. I'm Jonathan Hall.
Morning.
I'm cold.
Yeah,
You're wearing a hat. You look
freezing.
Cold. What else is frozen?
Go 122.
Ta-da!
That's a good one.
But we're jumping ahead.
Yeah, let's get into it. This week is almost totally focused on community stuff. We don't have anything official from the Go team. I think everyone's still recovering from vacation. But we do have two quote-unquote official news pieces. The first one is pre-release of 1.21.5 and 1.20.12. Unsurprisingly, this is a security fix. It should come out on December 5th. So just mark that on your calendar to make sure to update. Includes a private security fix to the standard library. My bet it's something to do with parsing, HTML, texting, whatever.
It's either NetHTTP or TextH or crap.
It's always the TIFF library, right? Like anyone is using TIFF format at all. We just recently talked to Yuho about finding all these vulnerabilities and whatever. I assume it's very exciting for the person who's like waiting for that security fix to drop. But for the rest of us, another upgrade to mark down on the calendar. But there's another thing to mark on the calendar. Why are we so cold? Everybody chill.
Yeah, Go 1.22 has been frozen, meaning no new features will be added. And they added a rule this time that hasn't been in effect in the past. Even in progress, CLs are frozen. That means that they won't be making it to 122. They'll be postponed for 123. And the Go 1.22 RC1 is expected to be tagged in just a couple weeks on December 12th. So this is that exciting time where we all start talking about all the great new features we're going to be using come February.
Yeah, Valentine's Day is our bet, right?
Yeah. I have my fingers crossed for Valentine's Day.
Yeah, so you know, we'll probably do a special episode once 122 drops, so we're not going to cling to every single news piece about it. We're just going to wait for it to drop, and then we're going to talk about what was shipped. But if there's anything interesting in the works, we'll obviously mention it. And like we said, because of the holidays and whatever, there's not a lot of proposal news. So we decided to focus on some community stuff we saw around our channel and around the interwebs. We're actually going to start, unfortunately, with Reddit. Because there was a somewhat interesting question, but I found very interesting was the answer. So someone got on the Golang subreddit and asked, I'm coming from the Java world. What conventions should I drop in Go? And before we dive into it, what do you say? Do you have a Java background? Did you ever do some Java work?
I never did Java, thank God.
Never?
Never.
Scala, Clojure,
Never.
Nothing?
Never. I have reviewed a couple of Java pull requests for some colleagues.
Well, I'm jealous as someone who had to do some Java, A for university and B in some like data engineering context.
My university was all C, C++, and assembly.
That's cool. My high school was all assembly, which was a lot of fun.
But I have definitely worked with a bunch of Java developers, and I've seen a lot of Java written in Go. And when you start to see 17 layers of factory methods, you know that they're coming from a Java world.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of easy stuff to poke out, right? Obviously, factory manager, factory generator, template, strategy, factory class is not really Go-ish. I wouldn't Go-ish, Goian, like Californian.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go Golangian.
I don't like that one.
But the main thing I at least think about is, you don't have to wait for the compiler too much, right? Because even just a super basic program in Java, you click compile, it takes forever. In Go, obviously, that was a focus of the language, and the build process is really fast. Anyway, this is like an interesting discussion. Anybody can like poke fun at Java. It's really fun because it's easy. It's also very slow, so it can't hit you back. But the thing that caught my eye was the answer from Matt Proud, the most upvoted answer, and for a really good reason. Just wrote like a whole blog post about, I was primarily an enterprise Java developer. I think what happened was he started writing and then sort of his hands took over, you know what I mean? Because it says a couple of observations and it sounds like it's going to, and then you have
a treatise of observations.
10 commandments. Even on my computer screen, I have to scroll to read everything. And there's a lot of really good stuff here. Even if you're not from Java, there's a lot of good tips here. For example, the name of a Go package matters a lot more than the import path, which in Java is not really true because you always have to go like com dot blah dot blah dot blah. Exception design and error is 100% thing the same, but in Go, obviously, you return a new error. And, if you come from Java, you might want to create finalizers. He says lean away from that and lean into defer, which is something that I think for, Java developers or Python developers is going to be really hard to feel comfortable with. And the last thing is that the standard library has a ton of batteries included, which is something, again, coming from other languages is usually kind of hard to grasp, that you can build a whole enterprise app with, just a few extra libraries to help you along your way, and you don't have to import. What's that JavaScript library? Is even.
Yeah.
Don't have to import all those stuff. So a really good answer. I recommend just go reading it and go upvoting it. Really nice work, Matt Proud, keeping the community, I think, really high quality with these types of answers. Nice to see on Reddit, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Rather than just a bunch of flame bait, some actual thought went into this one.
What was the last Reddit thing we saw? We saw the operator name. It's Go called Go because colon equals is the...
Yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes you can find some higher quality discussion there. Talking about high quality discussion, do you want to share that blog post you found?
Yeah, so here's one. It's since we're doing language comparisons today, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a post that I saw a couple places, actually, from Preslav Rochev. I hope I say that right. The title is Python is easy. Go is simple. Simple does not equal easy. And it's not a really in-depth article, but it's nothing earth-shattering to somebody who's been thinking about this before. But it is a nice reminder that easy and simple are not the same thing. Whether it comes to a programming language or an automobile or your favorite phone operating system or whatever. And this is a debate that I remember being involved in way back in the early days when everyone was like Windows versus Mac, in the Windows 3.1 days. And they were like, Mac is easier. And I remember saying back then, yeah, it may be easier to learn. That doesn't necessarily mean it's easier to use once you've learned it. And I think that's kind of the same point that is being made here. Python is easy. It has a nice low barrier to entry, but that doesn't mean it's simple. In fact, it's very not simple. It has a lot of complexity hidden behind the scenes. Go, on the other hand, is simple. So it's just a nice little comparison, a nice reminder that these two concepts that we often conflate are not the same.
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's worth mentioning that we already mentioned Preslav's blog on the show because he shouted us out. But it seems like he's writing a lot, and I love that. I love people who lean into writing a lot and writing interesting stuff. I do want to mention, if you want a bit more in-depth understanding of the words simple and easy when it comes to programming, especially for someone like me who's, English is second language. If we have more people listening who these words might translate the same into your language, there's a really, really good lecture by Rich Hickey. Apparently, we're talking about JVM languages a lot today as well. So Rich Hickey is the brains behind Clojure, which is, for me, the language that got away, along with Rust, like languages I'm trying to learn, but they're just not productive enough for me to actually hunker down and become professional at. But this lecture, even though I don't program in Clojure professionally, is just such a good lecture about what does simple mean, what does easy mean, like what do these words mean, where did they come from, and what did they mean in the context of programming. For example, ORMs are very easy because you can hook up objects to your DB and you don't have to worry about it. But they are the opposite of simple because it's very hard to use. They hide a ton of complexity from you. And when you want to, untangle this like web of interactions and whatever the ORM has created for you, it becomes very hard because it's complex, which comes from the word complicated, interwoven within one another. It doesn't come from the word complicated. It comes from the word complected, which is a different word. Anyway, you should really watch that lecture. I'll put that link in the show notes. Even though it's not a Go talk, I really recommend it.
Very cool.
Another banger from Preslav. Keep on coming, man. We love your writing, especially when it's about us. So one more thing we saw around the community. Actually, this is from our channel, which is a good place to shout out our channel, Go in the Gopher Slack. So Mihai, who's a great friend of the show, was an interviewee, was a co-host. Now he's posting in our channel. I guess he's trying to take over the show. I'm just kidding.
We got our eyes on you, Mihai.
Yeah. Stay in your lane. We talked last week about the Go doc proposal, right? Where you can Go doc a specific version of a package. And that kicked off a whole discussion about why would you even need that? Because, you can just go online and whatever. And there were a few interesting answers. One from you, right? Something about a relative version, relative paths.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that I like to use Go doc on the command line is because I can give it a path relative to my working directory. So like go doc period, for example, will show me the doc for the whatever directory I'm in. And you can't do that with the web.
Yeah. I'm wondering if they will, develop at some point like Command K for the Go doc site, in the same sense that every other site you open right now, like Spotify or Slack or Jira or all these enterprisey sites, they sort of hooked onto this Command K from Slack to search everything. I'm wondering if they'll do that as well. But, there's a lot of reasons. Also, for me, I mentioned offline development. If you have an air-gapped network, you're just not connected to the internet, but you have your own package and you vendored all the dependencies, you can still look at the documentation the way the authors meant for you to look at.
Although you can do that with the go doc server command as well, running locally. You can still render that to a website. So that is another option.
But so that was an interesting discussion. But actually what we wanted to highlight was really cool shell completion library that Ralph Stubbe shared. I think it's called Carapace Bin. I'm super happy because he posted it. And then I was like, oh, this looks cool. It has a ton of colors and it does completion, which is something I really like when it works. And then I hooked it up and it does work and it looks really good. Like I'll type go A tab. There's no go A command, right? I'll type go B tab and it'll like complete me to BU and it says either go bug or go build. Now, this is good for two reasons. One, all right, it brought me to go build, which is what I wanted to type. But also the thing I like about completion engines, why I like, for example, scrolling through all the functions in my IDE after typing period instead of typing the whole function out. Because usually I find stuff that I don't know about and I learn about it, right? I like copy code from somewhere that says, oh, you need to do this for loop to do this thing with a data frame or whatever. Then I'll type period and it says, oh, here's the function you wanted. We already developed it, right? So I, for example, forgot about go bug. Who remembers?
I didn't even know about that one. Yeah.
But now I know about it. And it does like a ton of completions, not just for Go, but basically for every program that's relevant. And I really recommend checking it out. We'll put the link in the show notes. It should be a pretty easy install. Doesn't work for everyone. At least seems like it, right? But hopefully John will be able to install it soon enough.
Yeah, I had some difficulties, but
yeah. And also behind the tool, there's a cool blog post about like all the different shells and all the documentation is pretty rich as well. So thanks, Ralph, for sharing it. It's a very cool tool, and it does work really well with Go Doc. He shared some screenshot in a GIF in the thread, so you all can check it out as well. Thanks for sharing.
Another shout out to our Slack channel. Peter Arnoff pointed to a little, it's even a blog post. It's like 3 paragraphs. It's a very short post that points to the testing.tb interface in the standard library from the testing package. The testing.tb interface is what backs testing.t and testing.b. So you probably use this all the time and may not realize it. But the interesting thing, and the post shows the full definition of the interface, it's mostly exported methods, things like error and fail and skip and things like this that we're all familiar with. But then at the end, there's a private method, and it's just called private, unexported. And the comment on it says, a private method to prevent users implementing the interface so that future additions to it will not violate the Go 1 compatibility promise. And so this post is just calling out this interesting idea of including a single private method in an otherwise public interface to prevent others from implementing it. It is an interesting technique. It's not without some drawbacks, in my opinion. But I'm curious, have you seen this before, Shai?
So I've tried to do it in the past by putting a huge comment on top. I've tried to do it in the past by naming the interface single interface, or I try to signal to developers through the medium of text. But I think it's a much stronger signal through the medium of, oh, I have to implement another thing. And then when I look at the documentation about how to implement it, it tells me, don't implement this. So I did the thing, just not with proper technique. But I guess proper is not really fair to say, right? Because it does clutter the actual interface. And it's also not that hard to circumvent. Nothing's going to call that function. So you can just raise a runtime error or whatever.
Right. So I mean, it's quite easy to circumvent this check if you want to. But I think the key is you have to do it intentionally. And the easy way to circumvent it is to just have your implementation embed one of the official implementations that has that private method on it. And then suddenly you satisfy the interface correctly. And you're good to go. But it requires an effort on your part. So, I think that proves that it served its purpose. I think the bigger question is that the last comment of the post says it's probably something that most Go PIs could take advantage of. And I would push back on that a little bit. The whole point of an interface usually is to allow unknown implementations to do the thing. So if you suddenly start doing this on most of your APIs, you're probably violating that principle. But there are times when it is appropriate.
And one thing worth mentioning, as usually happens, when this post was shared with us, I went looking through the blog because I like blogs, and it's a really good blog. We have some more stuff we want to take a look at. Like you mentioned, it has a different form factor. You have articles, which are like proper posts. You have atoms, which are sort of like a tweet, which is what we reviewed right now. And you even have fragments, which is just like a note, really super short notes that Brandon shares. I really like this form factor. It looks like a lot of love went into the site. They do have some more stuff coming up, so we would love to talk to them with a new job queue they're trying to post. Let's see if we can get a hang of them. If not, I'll install it myself and see how well it works. But a really good blog. We recommend you check it out. All right, and that does it for this week. Stick around for a really interesting interview. Who are we meeting today?
Today we'll be talking to Sam Lown, my ex-boss.
Ooh, spicy. All right, see you then.
Thanks once again for listening to this week's episode of Cup of Go. Just a reminder, we are looking for sponsors. If you or your company would be interested in owning this spot in our listeners' ears in the coming episodes, hit us up. You can contact us at news@cupago.dev or our website, cupago.dev. If you're interested in chatting to me or Shai or many of our other listeners, come by our Slack channel. It's Cup of Go Kebab Case on the Gopher Slack. There should be a link in the show notes if you're having trouble finding that. And a reminder that we have merch available. We sell mugs. This is a Cup of Go show, so you can buy your own Cup of Go cup. Shai is also preparing t-shirts and hoodies, so that should be live on our merch store in just a few days, if not sooner. So if you're interested in some wearable swag with a Cup of Go logo with Brewster, check that out too. And to celebrate Go's 14th birthday, we're offering a 14% discount on any merch that you buy between now and the end of the year. So check out code HAPPYBDAY14 when you buy from our merch store to save 14%. I think that wraps it up for the break. We're going to be doing an interview with Sam Lown, who's talking to us about invoicing and electronic invoicing in Go. It's a fascinating conversation. Stick around for that. And we'll see you next week.
Say, Jonathan,
Yeah.
are you vegan?
No, I'm not.
I'm like 50% vegan.
Yeah.
I really stick to that percent, even a little bit more. And there's one tradition I really like, the pardoning of the turkey. Every Thanksgiving, the president pardons one. Do you know they have names?
The turkeys have names.
Yeah.
Okay.
This year it was Liberty and Bell, which is kind of nice.
That's
But
cute.
you know what the problem with these turkeys are?
What?
They just gobble everything up.
But ching.
I wonder if there's any gobbling experts on the call that can help us with that. Oh, hi, Sam.
Hi. Yeah, maybe.
Worst intro of a Cup of Go so far? It's up there. It's up there.
Quite good, though. It's definitely an indication we need to get a logo for Gobble sorted out.
Yeah.
That was the best intro possible for that, yeah.
Yeah, we have a Brewster set up, so I could give you some advice.
Cool.
Brewster's our show logo, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to think of like a mixture between like the Go figurine thing and a turkey. We haven't had time to investigate yet, but yeah, any suggestions there would be awesome.
All right. Well, Sam, how about you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Sam. I'm classify myself as a software developer, and I'm currently creating a startup called Invopop, which is kind of a spin-off idea from my previous startup, a company called Cabify, which was a ride-hailing company we started back in 2011 out of Spain and launched in about 12 different countries globally. And I was there from the very beginning, battling with kind of Ruby and Node.js when we started that project. That's where I discovered Go. And one of the complications of Cabify was that we launched in all these different countries and we had to comply with local regulations on invoicing. So what that implied was doing some kind of integration with a local government service and sending invoices off in real time and lots of complicated things that we didn't have time to deal with. So we ended up doing lots of things manually. And that's when I came up with the idea for Invopop. I thought, wouldn't it be nice if there was a service out there that try to make life easier for developers to have a single integration point, and the service is responsible for doing all of these local integrations and sending everything, all this information wherever it's needed. So I've been working for about 3 years now on the project. I had a kind of a slow start. I wanted to kind of work on the open source side a little bit. And that's where Gobble comes in. It's our kind of Go project. It stands for Go Business Language.
Go Business Language. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, we put it in Go and like capital letters, so it's not totally associated with Go, but that's where that's the origin story, if you like. And the idea is to try and create this project for developers that uses JSON schema to generate business documents, predominantly invoices, in a format that's really easy to understand and use and globally compatible, and has the Gobble library itself has definitions for local taxes and stuff like that, and it's all completely open. And so what we're trying to do as well is build a lot of tools that help you kind of convert this format into whatever's required locally as well. So like if you're in Mexico, for example, they have a CFDI format there. So there's a tool there that allows you to convert your kind of JSON into the local format there. And then that's what we use in InvoPop with a workflow engine to kind of move the data along so it's easier for companies to integrate. That makes sense?
That's really cool. It sounds very difficult, and we'll definitely grill you on all the difficult parts of it. But before we, dive into Gobble, first of all, go open the library and start it if you're listening. Even just the tax, subdirectory in the open source package is giving me, I'm like scared of even touching it. So someone else doing it for me and doing it in Go, I mean, come on. But before we jump into that, I have another question. You used to be Jonathan's boss?
Kind of.
I've never really considered myself a boss. But we worked together on a very complicated project.
Well said.
It was a complicated situation. But because John and I have something strange in common. We both like CouchDB, which
that is strange.
It is.
Not many people like that. So I came across John's profile actually while using Kivik, which is John's library written in Go for accessing CouchDB databases. And, just randomly got in touch with us. We were looking for people to kind of help us with the last kind of spin-off project from my last company. And John said yes. So that's how we ended up working together for a while.
And I worked briefly with InvoPop as well. So if you go to the Gobble library, you'll see my name as a contributor. I didn't do anything earth-shattering there.
The CLI stuff, right? And that's still pretty much as you left, actually, John.
Cool.
Which is a testament that it's really good code.
I really want to do the whole collaborating with John gossip, but he's on the call, so I don't know if...
I can drop off for 10 minutes and let you guys have a chat.
Unfortunately, this is recorded and published, so we'll have to keep that to our secret, not published to John's phone podcast.
For Patreon viewers, you can Patreon subscribers, you can get the hot gossip behind the scenes.
Yeah. So I think the obvious question, at least for me, isn't it like hard and scary to try to claim I'm going to be your gateway to global regulations? Because, when doing global schemas and data sort of consolidation for different industries is super, super valuable. We had someone on the show that does this for like genomes and bioengineering and whatever. And then we were like, oh, this is super cool. This is super cool. This is super cool. But now that I think about these schemas, I'm like super worried. Quite if you mess up and someone gets their invoice, cut by 2 digits, or you mess up with the local tax because the government was overthrown and now all the taxes have to go to the new dictator or whatever. Like that's my first question. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't worry about it too much. And this is one of the things you discover when working with these types of projects, that most people don't really know what they're doing anyway. Most people,
I certainly don't.
A terrible thing to say. But when you look at companies and the way they deal with a lot of these situations, people tend to like fumble through anyway. So that kind of lowers the barriers to worrying about that sort of stuff. I think what is interesting for Gobble as well, we have this kind of aspirational side that we would like to see like a global international standard that was easy to use and based on a language. But I think setting out to create a project like that from the very beginning is really hard. I'm not sure if that's a good way of trying to do something. So for us, kind of Gobble is like a means to an end. So we basically needed in InvoPop a way to be able to create invoices globally. And there's just simply nothing out there. There are some kind of XML formats, nobody likes working with XML. I mean, literally nobody likes working with XML. I mean, I did speak to a regulator once who was saying, yeah, I kind of get used to it. But yeah, I mean, really, it's, nobody really likes working with that. So we needed something that would get the job done and help us to reach all these different places and make a pleasant experience. So for us, it's kind of a means to an end. If it does become something popular, I mean, one of the cool things with our format is that you can embed it in any PDF document. So if you do send an invoice, you can just embed this Gobble document. And so you avoid all this kind of rubbishy OCR stuff. And AI is pretty good now, obviously, but it's still not 100% accurate. And there's nothing compared to like reading the precise data directly. So that's where we see opportunity. But yeah, setting out to create something like that, extremely challenging. And to go back to the point on reliability of the data, I think that's where the open source bit comes in. If something doesn't look right, you can literally go in and change it. And that's one of our big kind of selling points from the company side now. If you see your data going into the system doesn't come out as you expect it, you can see the actual code that does the conversion. And I think that's extremely powerful. As a developer, like you tell that to a business guy, they probably couldn't care less. But as a developer,
yeah,
for me, that's like really cool and useful.
I always have to take a moment whenever someone says they couldn't care less. Wait, do you mean they could? Do you mean they couldn't? But I guess they could. You got it right this time, but I had to stop and think.
Yeah, so that's like a Yorkshire thing, I guess, as well. Yeah. I'm from Yorkshire, by the way. I could have mentioned that.
You say globally, but I assume it's not actually all over the globe, right? Like, I assume invoicing in North Korea is kind of difficult.
Yeah. I mean, it aspires to go global. That would be the correct phrase. So it could potentially be there. So we put a lot of emphasis in trying to make it so they can be used everywhere. I think at the moment we have like 12 different countries or something defined in the Go code, because that's the way it works at the moment. So we have this kind of basic structure in Go, loads of structs. We use a library called JSON schema that converts these Go structs into a JSON schema. And we have inside the Go code like a set of different packages for each region. So you like have a package for Spain, for Holland, Mexico, and these packages define kind of the local taxes and local validation rules and anything that's kind of required locally for it to operate. And that's where you can figure out all the different details. And these are also exported into JSON as well, so you can access it from potentially any language. And of course, the cool thing here, and this is a project that John actually helped us with, the cool thing with Go is that you can compile it into anything. And one of those anythings is WASM, so WebAssembly. So we still have a WebAssembly package that you can use from a website, and you can potentially use these kind of library and code anywhere you like, which I think is just super, super incredibly powerful.
So you just mentioned JSON schema, and as I recall, you or InvoPop took over maintenance of one of the JSON schema libraries. Is that right? Yeah. One of the tools to go back. I don't think we're doing a very good job of it recently. It's very difficult to maintain projects. Yeah. But yeah, we did take on board one of the projects. So we needed a few extra features, and it was difficult to get them into the original project. So we just decided, hey, we just take it over, because it's kind of core to what we're trying to do at Gobble. Yeah. So I'm curious. So Gobble uses JSON schema, but obviously not the whole world does. So there has to be a translation layer. And in the README here, I can see that you can convert into a couple different formats for Mexico, for Spain. How universally convertible is the data that Gobble understands? I mean, is it more? I mean, obviously that's the goal. You aspire to be global, but realistically, how? I can imagine that some countries, maybe even some cities, have requirements that are very unique and specific to their situation.
I'm just imagining the time zones thing, right? You want to convert an invoice that's delivered on a certain time in a certain place to a certain different place. Just converting the timestamp correctly is something I would be worried about. Yeah, timestamps. No, I mean the timestamps are pretty standardized. You can do those in the ISO format there. That's pretty easy. But yeah, that's one of the big challenges. So what we kind of saw is that 95% of any given invoice is pretty much the same everywhere. Mm-hmm. Certainly the useful bits. Yeah. The useful bits in terms of a company, who's selling it, who's buying it, codes, line items, totals, taxes, etc. So most of that is pretty much the same everywhere, certainly as far as the company is concerned. Where the complexity comes in is a lot of local countries require additional details. And this is kind of create a lot of potential listeners here might not know this, especially from the US. We had a lot of problems when we went through Y Combinator at the beginning of this year trying to explain the project. Because if you've been in Europe, you know what an invoice is.
and pretty much anywhere else. In the US, it's not quite so clear what exactly an invoice is.
Right.
So we had to actually come up with a phrase to describe the project. I'll give you that 2 sentences. InvoPop helps global software companies comply with local regulations. We do that by receiving a copy of every sale and making sure it gets to the right tax authority in the right format.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that kind of sets the scene a bit. So if you're in Mexico, for example, every single invoice that you generate, every single sale has to go to the government in real time and has to get a seal of approval before you can send it to the customer. Okay.
What?
Yeah, exactly. It's not obvious. Okay.
I remember being confused by this as an American living in Mexico. The first time I went to Office Depot to buy a printer cartridge or something, they're like, "Do you want an invoice?" I'm like, "Yeah," thinking they meant like a receipt. They're like, "All right, here, put down your tax info and like fill out this form." I'm like, what are you talking about? I just want a receipt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And all of that comes from the local regulation on taxes. So things like VAT and everything else, because the US doesn't have VAT. It has a sales tax. So everything you sell as a percentage of that goes to the government. That's quite easy to deal with, except for the staggering complexity on different tax rates.
Right.
Much of the rest of the world uses VAT, which of course has the advantage that as a company that receives an invoice with VAT, you can deduct it. So that means the invoice itself becomes a very important document that you need to manage. And that's where a lot of the complexity comes from locally. So from taxes, making sure you get the right taxes and everything else. In Gobble, we just have a list of what the local definitions are. If there's a lot of complexity, we just say, just put in your own rates and we can deal with it. The complication comes from specific requirements in governments that have additional fields. So for example, again, Mexico, good example. You need to know what tax regime the customer is in, for example. You also need to know what usage they're going to do with the invoice. There's a few classifications that you have to ask the customer for those details to put it on the invoice. And there's a big database. This one I love. Like in Mexico, they're crazy. They have a database of 50,000 different codes that identify everything that you sell. Like different shades of roses have different codes that you need to include on the invoice, which obviously is not humanly possible for anyone to kind of manage that. But you have to add one of these codes. So the way we do that in Gobble is we have extensions. So we kind of copped out. We didn't try and map the Go code into that. Mm-hmm. So we say, hey, look, if you have a local thing that's weird, use this key, assign the value you need for it, and then we'll just attach that to wherever it's relevant in the invoice.
Okay. And that's something that wouldn't be convertible. Like if I tried to take a Mexican invoice and convert it to Israeli receipt, like this specific field, you will filter out because it's an extension.
Exactly. It's additional. You don't really need to read it. Even if you know what it is, you can read it, but otherwise you just ignore it. That's the objective.
Cool. What other... I'm perusing in the repo because it's just so, there's something vicariously interesting reading these JSONs and trying to figure out all the little weirdnesses of human society. And I see that Poland is up next. There's a draft PR for Poland regime. I really like that word, like regime.
Yeah, it's tax regime. Like if you call it regime.
Okay.
It's not a political statement about the new election.
Yeah.
When you append the word tax and it makes the second word nicer. It's a tax regime, no problem. Usually it's worse, right? Oh, this is my haven. Oh, it's a tax haven. Oh, I don't know. So anyway, I see you're bringing in Poland as well. Is that something that's coming from the community, or is that something coming from like InvoPop needs and something that's like you back up? I'm asking because, in open source, there are two like schools of thought. This is a community project, and the promise you get is if the community backs out, you're out, which is something a lot of companies don't like to build on. A lot of individuals might be worried about. And the other end of the scale is the HashiCorp stuff, right? There's a single company behind it. If they decide to rewrite it in Ruby, then it's going to be rewritten in Ruby, and there's nothing. Or if they decide to close source it, there's nothing you can do about it. What would you say is the like balance here with Gobble? Is it more community or is it more your company kind of thing?
Yeah. No, at the moment it has to be our company because simply not many people are using it. The long-term objective is for it to be more completely open. And we specifically chose the Apache 2 license. There's no kind of commercial weird license there. We want everything we do on that side to be completely open. And our eventual aim is to get random people contributing to the project. I'm really keen, for example, to see someone contribute tax supporting Timbuktu, for example. That's like that would be awesome. That's where we want to get to. I think we're a long way off that. And no, what we're doing at the moment in Poland, actually, this is a bit of an experiment. We're experimenting with a local team there who are creating the open source project to convert Gobble into the local format. And it's a bit of an experiment. We've not done that before. We're going to see what it looks like. But like the Polish local invoicing format, they have a similar system to Mexico. So it's all centralized. You have to send copies of invoices to the local government. The XML format, so they have an XML format, is written in Polish.
Oh,
like they haven't translated. Literally the fields.
The tags are in Polish?
The tags are in Polish.
Well, at least they picked an easy language.
With a simple character set.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess they're not using local characters for that. I mean, that would just be crazy. But they're not just that as well. They're actually just using codes for complicated subjects. So like P12-AB is like a specific meaning in the XML document. So they actually gave up trying to do Polish names for the field. And so what the guys are doing in Poland are doing an awesome job of just like creating the converter, writing the Go structs in English, and then putting the mappings alongside them and trying out the comments and all the details, so that someone else from another country can come along and actually understand what the hell's going on, or even like a Polish person. I mean, nobody knows what P12 means. I mean, that's just meaningless gobble. Gobble. What's it?
Gobble's pretty fun there, right?
Gobblish. I need to improve the things.
Gobblish is pretty good. Maybe you can name your schema language Gobblish.
Gobblish. Oh, there, that's.
The Go business language. It's like an ATM machine.
Yeah.
Well, if I would like to add like Israel or whatever, because I'm looking at regimes, I'm not seeing IL there. Is it like a huge undertaking? Do I have to be a tax? Do I have to understand anything in finance? Because even just setting up our merch store was one of the scariest experiences of my financial life. I'm not very financially literate, but I know what money is. I like it. Could I? Do you think it's possible for someone like me who knows Go but isn't an accountant?
Yeah.
I do. I do think it's relatively easy. You've got a lot of examples there to kind of guide you in what would be required. You know what VAT. I'm assuming Israel has VAT, for example. I guess so. So it's just a question of knowing what the local VAT rates, having a bit of experience in the system. I mean, you probably know already if there's like some kind of local income tax that needs to be applied to invoices, retained taxes.
I know it intimately. About half my money knows it.
But sometimes, like if you're, as a freelancer, if you're sending out invoices, you have to retain taxes in certain countries. Again, for the US, this is completely unheard of. But in Europe, it's quite common that when you send out an invoice, you have to ask the customer to retain some of the taxes.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you have to pay income tax, so you ask your customer to retain 15%, they have to pay the VAT on top. So there's a lot of weird stuff like that in Spain, for example. So just having that kind of local knowledge already gives you kind of a really good position to be able to figure out what's required locally. I do think it's really worth planning to do electronic invoicing at some point as well. So there's a big switch happening in the world, certainly in Europe, towards electronic invoicing. In Latin America, we'd already made the switch like 10 years ago. And that kind of same pattern is coming to the rest of the world, where governments are realizing that, hey, if we could digitize this stuff, we can get taxes much more easily. We can have a lot more control over what's happening and figure out how we can make that all that more efficient.
By lowering the barrier of like sending out an invoice, you just get more taxes, not out of people who are trying to like game the system, but just people who would trade cash with
Well, I'm not sure if it's lowering the barrier, because it does, electronic invoicing does make it a little bit more complicated, and this is where I think.
But you don't have to go and buy out an ink cartridge and then, like Jonathan said, fill out your mother's maiden name to get the invoice back.
It's definitely easier than that. But I think companies have kind of missed the boat on electronic invoicing. I think there's a lack in general of the world of being able to communicate more easily between companies. I think it's way too paper-based, and I think one of the fundamental reasons for that is because it's so freaking complicated. I think there's a lot of complexity in the business world and business documents, and that's where I can see like Gobble that's one of our obsessions, of just trying to make it a little bit easier. You can imagine, for example, if Amazon, just to give us a random example, suddenly decided to issue all of invoices in electronic format. How much easier that would make managing Amazon invoices for companies. You could easily do the bookkeeping, add it to all your records instantly, and you wouldn't have to faff around with all these PDFs and documents and everything else that make everything hard work. And of course, what's happening now is in a lot of countries, the governments are seeing the opportunity here for taxes, and they're kind of in lots of places leaving the benefits for the companies to one side. So they're making it easier for themselves to get taxes, not necessarily making it easier for companies to communicate between each other. And I see potential problems with that. But yeah, generalizing quite a lot there. It's an interesting situation.
Going back to the topic of conversions, you mentioned that this Polish XML variant made me wonder. I was reminded of an interview we did about genomics in Go, where trying to convert gene formats to something standard, which sounds like a nightmare because the primary format is basically a space delimited. My imagination is that it depends on like lining up things textually. It was designed to print out on a line printer in the 1970s or something like that. We still use that format. Do you have any really crazy formats like that? I mean, I've heard of even MasterCard still doing clearances with text-based formats. Do you have to deal with anything like that still, or is that forfortunately behind us?
No, we've not had the opportunity yet. I mean, there's a big global format out there called EDI. That's still text-based, like column widths, text separation. It's exactly like the format you just described, and that's still widely used globally. Like big corporations who have the kind of purchasing power to say to their suppliers, you're going to use this or you're not going to sell to us. They still use technologies like that. So there are things out there that helps you. There's a company in the US called Steady, I think, and they help convert like JSON into these archaic EDI text formats. And one of the issues around that as well, and this is one of the reasons why I can see like a more of an industrialized standard would help. A lot of these companies tend to add their own things to the format. So it's not like an EDI is universally acceptable everywhere. Like a lot of companies come in and add their own little fields in places, which of course means you have to have specific conversion tools for specific companies, which is an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, opening EDI's Wikipedia page here is, first of all, I can't believe it's called EDI because it stands for Electronic Data Interchange, which is like, what? Be a little more specific, please. But once you see a standard and the thing on the standard says, some major sets of EDI standards include, you're not going to have a good time.
Yeah. No, and there have been kind of inroads on that. There's a project called PEPL, which was sponsored by the European Union, which is one of the most widely spread kind of international formats. It's based on XML. And they're doing a pretty cool job of getting that. I think one of the big failings of PEPL, though, they created a system for document interchange. And they basically invented their own way of document communication. And you read, I think, what was it? If you look up AS4 electronic distribution or something like that, e-delivery, I mean, there's just the first phrases of how they describe the project is just utterly, totally confusing. It's one of these libraries that, definition specifications that only exists in Java. No, this is the only implementations that exist are in Java because it's so incredibly complicated to implement. And that's another one of those things that, like, guys, just make it simple. Like this just it doesn't need to
make
be
it
hard.
approachable.
Yeah, and that's one of the fundamental reasons what kind of spinning back here to like Go. And that's why I love Go. It just takes no nonsense, quick in everything, fast to run, fast to learn, fast to manipulate. It's just an excellent language, and that kind of really attracts me. Just trying to make things simpler because there's already a lot of complexity out there.
And when you talk about this sort of simplicity or approachability, Gobble has some companion stuff, if you don't want to write a Go binary that you can still interact with, right? You have a CLI, you have a builder, you have some Ruby stuff.
Yeah. No, so what we're trying to do, there's two parts to that. On one side, we're trying to get it so that you can write Gobble documents in any language. So we have a tool that converts the JSON schema. At the moment, converts it into Ruby, so it'll generate all the classes and the structures and give it a lot of wrappers around that, which is really cool. And we'd like to do the same for other languages. We haven't had time or much demand for that yet, but that's one of the possible paths we can go down. So you can like bring the whole language into whatever language you're using. I think that's really helpful. And the other thing we're kind of really proud of is a tool which is public called build.gobble.org. It's like a playground. And it's basically, at the moment, the base version is just basically embedding the Monaco editor, so like the VS Code editor on the web page. And because that has built-in support for JSON schema, it allows you to kind of validate documents, write them, and give suggestions. And it's got some build buttons on there, so you can use the WASM binary inside there. And what's really cool, what we're working on now is like a tool that will convert that JSON document into something that's a little bit more accessible for people who don't know JSON. So for business people, finance teams and everything else, we're trying to create a version that still has the flexibility of JSON. So you can add all these weird fields we talked about before, but is kind of simple and easy to use. So on this build side, we're kind of working on a tool set there to make it all a little bit more accessible.
It seems highly inspired by the Go playground. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I love that stuff. That's awesome.
It's really cool to see like how the language impacts apps that people build within the language and not the other way around.
Yeah, and JS Fiddle and all these kind of tools, they're very much inspiring for that. And none of these things exist in like business document world. I think this is like a real first.
I think it's because they're fun, and business document world is not fun.
Yeah, but it could be, right? It could be fun. No, and invoices can. No, maybe not. But I mean, we try to make
saying
it
that
fun.
to yourself. This is not the official position of the show. That invoicing.
the next version of Gobble is going to add like gamification, right? You can win badges and achievement unlocked.
No, I mean, the key thing we're missing.
You won capitalism.
We definitely need that logo with the turkey. I think that's pretty obvious.
I would just tie a string around the gopher's head. It's a little bit too tight and has the turkey thing
that's
on
quite
top,
a good one,
like a party hat.
So we've talked about the concept of Gobble and some of the war stories. I'm curious, how can listeners or which listeners should get involved, and how can they start using it? Can they contribute? Just generally speaking, how can we answer that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd be super interested to hear from anybody who's is dealing with business document problems in Go. I'm not sure how frequent that is, but certainly I think what we try to do with Gobble is make it so that it's helpful for anybody who's trying to write a business document. Like even just like a contact is actually, when you're as a developer, when you have how to write down some kind of business detail for a contact or something similar, that could be actually quite complicated. And you end up reinventing the wheel all the time. So what we try to do is this Go library is just predefined structures, JSON, just store it and forget about it. No? So any developer who's kind of interested in just using that kind of side of the project, or if you're doing some kind of invoicing, then let us know if you're interested in contributing for like your local country. If you want to add a local specifications, just get some of the groundworks in there. It's pretty straightforward. All we need is some of the basic taxes and some kind of tax ID validation if there is some local tax ID. We'd be super, super keen to hear feedback.
Great. And what's the best way to provide that feedback? How can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, on the Gobble website, we have the docs.gobble.org. That's one of the main entry points for learning about the project. Obviously, the GitHub page, which is github.com/infopop/gobble. There we have the kind of discussions. It's open to send in pull requests there directly. And we also have a Slack channel, which is linked to, I can't remember the name now. I think we couldn't use gobble.slack.com. It was something else. So my brain's gone blank. But you can find the links for that inside the documentation site.
Wonderful.
So it's gobbleschema.slack.com. I just joined.
Awesome. That's fantastic.
As part of me adding Israel to the to-do and like committing to yes, I'm gonna do it.
You know what? I'm gonna create an Israel channel in there, so we can.
So it's gonna be even sadder when I don't finish that task on time in 3 months. That might just be enough to convince me. You know what I mean?
All right. Well, as we always do, we have 2 questions we like to ask our guests, and we primed you before we hit record. So maybe you've had time to think about it. Somebody's holding a gun to your head. They said, Sam, you have to remove a feature from Go. What would it be?
The easy choice here is generics.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah,
I actually have used it a few times. But it just kind of adds a little bit of noise.
Fair enough.
That would be my main one.
Not the first time we've had that answer. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's
totally.
an easy one. Yeah. Kind of it's one of these defining. But I mean, the way they did it, I think is really good. I must admit. I remember we discussed this, John, some time ago. Like the way they decide on how to implement it's kind of opt-in. It's not too confusing, and not many people use it. So I'm kind of okay with it. But yeah,
it's slowly growing on me as I start to actually use it. But let's flip it around the other way. You have the opportunity. You have a magic wand. You can wave it and add some feature to Go magically. What would you like to add?
Yeah.
I'm wondering what people who did Ruby are usually way into Ruby. So I'm wondering if it's something from there.
Yeah, I mean, what I miss about Go is like the Ruby community. I mean, it's probably too nostalgic. Like in the early days of Ruby, back in 2006 is when I started with Ruby on Rails. There was an awesome community, but it was like a feeling of craftsmanship and that kind of, we're doing something new and the quality is really important. And that sometimes I kind of feel is lacking in a lot of some of the Go stuff. But I don't want to sound too complacent there, because I think it is getting better. A lot of the Go projects are actually really, really good.
Especially the Catch2Be related ones, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was excellent. Yeah, that's really good.
Good answer.
I'm just here to point out that one thing that we can bring from Ruby is a language that we can name dogs after. Because I'm going to call a dog a gopher, but I already met 3 dogs called Ruby because of the language.
Really?
So maybe Go 2 can be called I'm
going to start working my kids to call the next dog Gopher.
That's going to be a bit confusing for everyone, I think. Even more confusing than EDI. Well, thanks a lot, Sam, for jumping on the show.
Absolute pleasure.
I'll just mention one more time, if you do want to check out InvoPop and Gobble, it's both on the same site. You can just go to invopop.com or gobble.org. Go read it. I think it's an interesting read, just in the general sense of seeing a Go project that's a little bit different than the usual web service, microservice thing that the language is usually for. And, sounds like InvoPop's really on a good mission. I hope you beat out the competition and make invoicing slightly less horrible. I'm not going to go as far as fun, but slightly less horrific.
Yeah, I mean, making invoicing great again doesn't really that great, was it? But
it could be good merch, though.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, Sam. Cheers.